So my name is Ellis Freeman, and I'm the curator here at the Minnesota Discovery Center. Being a curator means that I get to research and develop both temporary and permanent exhibits, as well as take care of our 3D objects collection to make sure that it's preserved for future generations. So today, we're going to explore our exhibit on the immigrant journey to America. But before we get to do that, I do want to cover a few different topics. The first being, the normal story is that European immigrants came to Minnesota, and that's essentially when history starts. That is incorrect, actually. We weren't the first people to inhabit this land. We're actually on the ancestral homes to the Dakota and Ojibwe people. And this is important because if we don't acknowledge this, we have a chance of erasing their history. And the Ojibwe still call this region home, and their place within our community is just as important as anyone else's. The second thing that I would like to address is just, as we talk about immigration today, which is a pretty big topic, I do want you to think about how some of these things and the stories that you're going to hear can relate to you today. I know we tend to think that history happened a long time ago and it has no relevance to us today, but my job for us in this video is to prove to you that it is. So just please take time and think about how these things can relate to your day-to-day life. So as you heard in the opening of this video, the journey to America was a pretty long and lengthy, sometimes dangerous one. What made people trek across the giant ocean and come here from Europe? Well, let's take a dive into history and find out. So we'll begin this immigration breakdown by first examining who came here. In short, a lot of people from Europe did. In fact, it was probably easier to find someone who wasn't represented on the Iron Range. Based on the 1910 census, we know that there were 25 different nationality or ethnicities on the Iron Range that had a significant population, and this totaled to some 41,000 residents. This mass migration created a diversity on the Iron Range that was rare to see outside of places like New York City or Chicago. Again, based on the 1910 census, we know that at least 50% of Iron Range residents were foreign-born. Many of them didn't have any intention of staying here permanently and would return home as soon as they made some money. And we know that about 1/3 of them actually did return to their home countries in Europe. This boom of immigrants to the Iron Range began in the 1880s, and by the early 1900s, it was in full swing. This was actually part of the largest mass migration in human history, and between 1880 and 1924, 26 million people would leave their homes for America. Since this was a time before any type of websites or travel brochures, a lot of people found out about America in many different ways. Steamship companies would have different advertisements to try and entice immigrants to come over. Stories were also shared with people returning from America to their home countries. And on top of that, letters were also sent back home, and these were so important that everyone in the village would either read them or listen to them being read aloud. For both departing immigrants and those that they left behind, the opportunity to leave everything they knew and come to America was life-changing. Following difficult goodbyes, they believed that America would either provide them an opportunity of refuge, adventure, or safety. They were soon to find out, though, that this wasn't always the case, and sometimes America only offered broken promises. A family would often save for months or even years to send just one person. Normally just one person would come first, and then they would send for the rest of the family later. They would have to travel by railroad or by cart or sometimes even by foot, carrying all the few possessions that they owned. Then once they got to the port of departure, they might even have to wait weeks or months until the ship arrived. And then they were given cursory medical examinations and deloused, and their journey to America began. Most of the immigrants who decided to come to America had to travel in steerage class. This often was the cheapest accommodation, and so they were quick to take advantage of that. However, it's basically just one giant room with hundreds of bunks, which often led to cramped and smelly accommodations. The conditions in steering class were pretty atrocious. Bad smells, poor ventilation, you were basically given no privacy. Toilet and washing facilities were extremely inadequate, and food, if it was even provided at all, was not really that delicious. All in all, you basically had to share your life with a bunch of strangers and had to smell a lot of different things and even hear other people being seasick. The immigrant trade also proved to be highly profitable for steamship companies. They realized that they could cram a bunch of steerage class passengers into one space and make more money off of it than they could with first or second class passengers. As an example, the ship the SS Patricia only had space for 162 first class passengers, 184 second class passengers, but had room for over 2,100 steerage class passengers. So finally, the arrival to Ellis Island. This basically acted as the primary gateway for most European immigrants coming over the Atlantic Ocean. So their main point of entry was right outside of New York City. And this proved to be an extremely busy port. Between 1892 and 1924, 12 million immigrants would come through the doors. And a particularly busy year was 1907, when just that year alone, 1 million people came through Ellis Island. Class discrimination was in full swing, and it was extremely rare for first or second class passengers to even have to enter Ellis Island. On the ship, they were just given cursory medical examination